Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo. This week we're going to go over my attempt to build a cedar hard dodger, or a hard dodger made out of cedar. Now this admittedly is a little bit outside of my skill set. I'm not a finished carpenter by any stretch of the imagination. So I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Hey, before we start, let me know in the comments down below, do you think I was successful in creating a structurally sound, aesthetically pleasing cedar hard dodger, or did I fail at my attempt? Let me know what your initial guess is. I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. And alas, we've come to the hard dodger construction. Admittedly, this was outside of my area of expertise. I am not someone that has a lot of patience. I am normally a very goal and task-oriented person. If I have a task to complete, I want to get it done as fast as humanly possible. And then, like when I was working a full-time job, I didn't have to be at my job for any set number of hours. I had responsibilities that I had to complete, and as long as that got done, then everyone was happy. So I would go to work and get my crap done as fast as humanly possible, as well as possible. I would not do a poor job, but I tried to get it done as fast as possible just so I could get it done, go home and relax. You know, that's my time. And my time, quite frankly, is the most valuable thing in the world. And I hope you feel the same way about your time. So, that being said, when it comes to doing stuff, and I approach sailing the same way. I always, which I've gotten a lot better at. But still, if I know I have to cover 45 miles that day, I'll get up early in the morning, take off, get on the road, and get it done, just so I can relax when I get there. And I can get to an anchorage, I know there's going to be space, I can anchor, I can just relax, I'm here. Life is good. And I see people that get up and fart around. I'm always out there at first light, and other people fart around. They leave like at 11 o'clock in the morning, and I can't understand that. I would be nervous. What if something goes wrong? If you're going to have a problem, you want to have a problem during daylight, right? That's my philosophy. But man, I guess some people are just way more relaxed than I am. I guess I'm wound a little tight. But so anyway, I'm very goal oriented. When I know that something has to get done, I want to get it done quickly, just in case something goes wrong. I can adjust and I have time to deal with the problem. So I knew I had to approach this project differently. I wanted the Dodger to be aesthetically pleasing. I wanted it to look stunningly beautiful. I wanted to be proud of how it looked. And it had to be structurally sound. When you're out there in a blow, I've been caught in microbursts, and they get wicked. And that Dodger is basically a cup. So if your wind, you would think the bow would align itself so that the wind would always be hitting the front of the Dodger and it wouldn't act like a big scoop. If the wind is hitting the back of the Dodger, it's basically a big cup that's scooping up all that air. And that's a lot of force on the Dodger. But if you're in a situation where the wind is blowing one way and the current is blowing the other way, you can get into a situation where the wind is blowing into the Dodger from the back, and that can put a lot of pressure on the Dodger. So I knew it had to be very strong, and I wanted it to look good. So my plan was to construct it out of 1x4s. So you can get 1x4s at the Home Depot's Cedar, and I was just going to put them together and then create my Dodger that way. So I knew I had to attach them together, and I was going to do that primarily with glue. And I researched all the different glues, which one was best for outdoor, which was the strongest, blah, blah, blah. And that's what sucks about the internet nowadays. You can read 100 websites that are comparing glue, but you don't know who sponsored that study or that review. Is it objective, or did Gorilla Glue pay them to put Gorilla Glue #1? I mean, who knows, right? So you just don't know nowadays. There's almost too much information. But So I had to do it. So there are two ways that you can connect boards together. You can either do it with dowels, which are little rods, and you drill a hole into each part of the wood, and then you insert the dowel into one side, you glue it in there, then you put glue on the other side of the dowel, you put glue all along the seam, and then you put the two together, and so the dowel locks the two pieces together. And you put dowels all along the board, so I would put 5 or 6 of them along, which was probably more than I needed, but that stops the wood. So if you join two boards together, that would stop one of them from twisting over time. So that's one way of doing it, with dowels. The other way is with biscuits, and biscuits are like little flat football shaped things, and you actually have an electric tool that you put on the board, and it carves out a little, like, I don't know, little half circle, and the biscuit acts just like the dowel does. You glue the biscuit in between the two boards, and it holds the boards, and it serves the same purpose. So doing research on biscuits versus dowels, I found out that dowels are stronger. So I wanted it to be strong, so I went with dowels. And to do that, you need a jig. So I reviewed all of the different jigs for dowels, and I found one that was around $70. It wasn't the most expensive, it wasn't the cheapest, but it was the lower cost option that had the best reviews. And I have to say, the one that I purchased, I'll put it up on the screen here, worked fantastically. I had no problems with it. It's basically just a clamp. So if your board is right here, your jig goes on, it clamps on, and then you've got a guide that you put a drill into, and then you can drill into your wood. You know it's in the center, you know it's going in at a right angle, and you know that your other hole is going to match up with it. So the jig was very, very much worth the money. It would have been chaos if you tried to do it without a jig. So I was very happy with the jig. So that worked great. Now, my first attempt, so when I did this, first I took off the soft dodger. I did that when I did the deck. And then my first thought was, okay, I'm going to mock this up out of using styrofoam. So I bought a sheet of 1/2 inch extruded polystyrene, and I figured I could cut out the shapes of the different panels. Now the front of the boat, there's one, you know, your main viewing, then there's 2 on the side, and then there's 2 that go back towards the cockpit. So there's 5 panels that would make up the walls of the Dodger, and then there would be a roof. Now the roof, I knew I would, if this is the center of the roof here, I knew I was going to have to tip it slightly outward and tip it slightly forward. So that was going to be complicated to do that angle, and then, you know, so water could run off of it, and then it would be more aerodynamically shaped. So that was the thought behind that. Because I didn't, you know, it is going to be made out of wood, and I was going to treat it, or I am going to treat it, and I didn't want water to be pooling on top of it, so that's why I thought I would tip it slightly forward and then slightly out towards the sides. So that was the thought. And then on the back, because there would be 2 roof panels, on the back side it wouldn't be supported, so I was going to take a 1x4 and bridge it across the back so it would be facing closest to the cockpit, and then I would slightly taper that 1x4 down, only by about 1/2 inch from the center outwards, and then I would sand it to get that forward angle correct. So I knew all of this was going to be very complex to pull off, and I wanted to take a lot of time. I wanted to move with intention, and I wanted to do it correctly. So I bought my cedar boards, I bought my dowels, I bought my glue, I got my clamps, and I did my first attempt. Now, my first attempt was very foolhardy. I didn't have on my thinking cap. I thought, okay, I've got a flat table. I'm going to cut out all my little pieces. I've got my template. I'm going to line up those pieces around the template. I know where my window is going to go, so I'm not going to fill the whole window with a board, of course. So I'm just going to cut out little, 4-inch chunks of wood along the top and the bottom, that'll make up the frame for that window. and I'm just going to dowel it all together, and then I'm going to clamp it, and everything will be good. Well, I should have been smarter than that. But I'm not. I'm stupid. I've never done anything like this before. So I just didn't think it through. So if this is the flat plane where all of the pieces of wood were on, as soon as I started to clamp it, because they were such small pieces, they started to move this way in relation to each other, even though there were dowels in there. Cedar is a soft wood, so you had to be very careful the clamping pressure that you were putting on both sides, and because otherwise you'd get some twisting going on. And then also, as soon as you put any sort of clamping pressure to bring everything together so the seams were tight, well, then it started to curl up like this. And I should have thought of that. In my mind, I just thought, oh great, it's going to lay flat and everything's going to be wonderful. But that certainly was not how it went. So that was my first attempt, and that was an abysmal failure, but it was a learning attempt. You know, we're still early on, so let's go ahead, let's reassess, do some troubleshooting, what went wrong, how can I fix it, and let's proceed forward. So the next attempt, I knew I had to support it both, I mean, on two different axes, right? We're actually dealing with three different axes, but, you know, I had to have two layers going in opposite directions, so one layer would support the other layer's tendency to move. So that meant a lot more clamps. So initially I just bought two big clamps because I thought I could just clamp everything together, it would lay nice and flat and everything would be good. But that, you know, so I bought a bunch more clamps, some smaller clamps, and I knew where my window was going to go that I would have to have a lip behind it so I could set my plexiglass in, you know, caulk in some trim around it, and then the window would be in there. So I knew I had to have that back support. So I decided to just use a 1x4 as the back support, and then so my boards were going vertically, right, this way, and then that lip would be in the back. I guess I have it backwards on the camera. And that would come up a 1/2 inch, and then all the little boards would be along this way. And what I could do that way, by orienting it that way, I could clamp it both down and sideways. So that controlled, so I could clamp everything nice and tight together. And I'm sorry if you hear dogs playing upstairs, but I could clamp everything nice and tight together so I had tight seams, and I could also clamp it this way down to that lip, that 1x4 that was going to be the rail for the window, and that prevented the boards from curling. So I could control its direction, I could control the board, I could support it in all directions while the glue dried. So I put glue all the way around the rail. So I'd glue both, you know, on both surfaces. I'd glue in between the boards that are going together, and then I would glue those onto the other board, so it was glue all everywhere. And that actually ended up working okay. I was a little bit shocked, but we had no problems. Since the second method of panel production was working well, it was time to go ahead and just start banging out these panels. The front three panels of the Dodger were the most clearly defined. The two on the sides were a little bit nebulous. I knew I was going to have to tilt them in a little bit, and that was just so the boom for the mainsail could actually clear the sides. And also, once the, you know, polystyrene's a little bit, it's obviously a little bit flappy, whereas the cedar is going to be very rigid. So I didn't want to make those two upright panels until I got the first three installed, and then I was just going to construct those right at the boat. So the goal was to make the three main panels, and then everything else would be made in place after that. So that's the way I attacked it. So I got the three panels made, I glued everything together, and sorry about the noise again, I think World War III is going on up there, I'm not sure. The joys of living with someone else. So I got the three, so I had to make the three panels, so I banged those out, I got everything lined up good, And some of the angles were a little tricky, but I think I actually feel really good about the way they turned out. Now, obviously there are manufacturing defects in the Cedar. Home Depot doesn't always have the best wood, and Cedar itself, they have a limited selection, and it's not like they get fresh shipments every week. So you kind of have to work with what you've got. So there was a little bit of, you know, a little bit of wiggle in the joints there, so I did have some joints I had to fill in. So I just used, I sanded down the surface, so I had a lot of fines. I have, my orbital sander has a dust collection system, so I had a bunch of Cedar fines. I just mixed that with wood glue, and then I mixed it, you know, up into like a paste or a cake batter, and then I put it in the seams, and that worked really well. So I sanded everything down on all of my panels, and I actually think they looked wonderful. Now that's what I think. Now someone else might not think that, but I was very impressed with what I had created. I thought they looked really good, and I'll just leave it at that. Of course, you're free to your own opinion. But I was very happy with the way they turned out. So then came time for the installation. Now I purposefully built these panels slightly larger than what my polystyrene template was, because I knew once I got to the boat and I went to install these panels, I would have to trim them down. All the angles, you know, where the panels come together are going to be, you know, slightly different. So I knew I would have to cut off little chunks of wood to get everything to line up properly. So I built them on purpose, you know, a couple inches larger on either side, so I could trim them down and everything would fit perfectly. So the first day I got the first two, the way that I decided to construct this was there was an existing rail that went around the front, and that is what the soft dodger attached to. So my plan was just to attach the hard dodger. It's like a 2x2 that's got, you know, a little rounded on the top. So it's basically a 2x2 channel that goes around, and I was just going to butt the panels up to that on the front and then just attach it right to that rail. And I'm going to ruin the surprise for you. That was a fatal flaw. So if you guessed I was not successful, you're correct. But I learned what I did wrong, and I'm going to attempt it next year again, and I have a much sounder plan for next year. So, you know, part of building this kind of stuff is figuring out what you don't know and, you know, going forward with it. So I figured out what I didn't know, and the largest flaw in my plan was to try and reuse that rail. And that rail is not sufficiently strong. It's plenty strong, but the only way that I could attach the Dodger to that rail would not have been strong enough to survive a microburst. So that was a flaw, and I didn't realize that until I was installing it. And also, it severely limited. You can see there's rails on both sides. Now obviously the hatch goes over. In the way that I mocked it up, because the rails go backwards, you know, there's a little chunk on the port side that's flush with going straight across, and then on the starboard side it is immediately angled back. Now when you have a soft Dodger, that's not a problem, because a soft Dodger can just bend all the way around. But when you have a hard Dodger and you have a joint that meets at one edge of the hatch where the hatch cover slides out, there is absolutely no way to make that joint strong enough so that it will withstand a microburst. And I realized that so I got the two side panels, I got them all trimmed up nice, they were gonna fit. It was a little bit, I did build it a little tall, and I may have been able to, because I had, you know, a couple inches on the top, a couple inches on the bottom, I may have been able to trim it down enough so that it would have worked. But by the time I got to that stage, I realized that this joint on the starboard side, where the angled back panel how I don't, where the angled panel met the front panel, there's no way, no how, there's no way on earth I could make that strong enough to withstand a microburst. So I knew at that point it was game over. I probably could have, it was higher than I wanted it to be. That was a flaw. When I constructed the polystyrene Dodger, the panels were tilted back further, and that just is because of the natural bow of the polystyrene. And once I had rigid panels in place, they were too high. The main boom would have hit them. Like I said, I think I could have maybe fixed that, but there were just too many other problems with the construction or the conceptualization of it that I knew that it just, at that point, when I was trying to install that center panel, I knew it was game over. There was no way to fix it, because no matter how I built it, even unless I got a piece of angle iron and, you know, and had it bent to that specific angle and put it in there, it wouldn't have been strong enough. And I don't even think that would have made it strong enough. It was just a built-in, it was like the Jinx and the Death Star. Luke would have came by, or a microburst would have came by and just lobbed a bomb in there, and it would have been all over. So at that point I knew it was game over. Now, I did say, I almost, you know, early on I was feeling a little arrogant when I was building this. I'm like, this is going to be fine, this is going to work great. I don't have to save the whole old hard Dodger, or the old soft Dodger. If I throw it away, that means that I can't fail. But then thankfully I realized, yeah, you can fail. So thankfully I saved the old soft Dodger. Now it is in really bad shape, and I'm hoping that it will survive for another year. Next year I'm going to make an attempt. I am not going to use the old rail. I'm going to build a brand new track. I'm going to dado blade it out. I'm going to have everything angled to fit in there perfectly. I'm not going to have one unsupported edge like I did the Death Star Jinx on the old one. I've basically learned, and I'm sure I'll make mistakes next year too, but I've learned fundamentally what I did wrong on this design. Now, I actually didn't waste that much money on it. I wasted around $400 total between all the dowels and the Cedar, so it wasn't a major catastrophic loss of funds or anything. So it was an expensive learning lesson, but it was a learning lesson nonetheless. And I look forward to attempting it next year again, because I really like the look of the Cedar. I think it looks great. I found some great boards that had the two-tone white and red. I'm going to try and find a little more of that next year. And my intention was to coat it with a 50-50 mix of purified linseed oil and pine tar. Now that is an old school sealant, but I think I've seen it on a few boats. It's a very old school way of doing things, but it's a very durable finish, and I was going to give that a try. I already had the linseed oil and the pine tar. I've ordered it in from Sweden. I was super excited to give it a try, but that's going to have to wait till next year. And I eventually, you know, on EJ has got such beautiful woodwork, but all of the coatings are Cetol, and I just do not like Cetol. It flakes off. To me, it's absolute garbage. I just don't like it. Where it stays on, it does a good job, but it's not like a penetrating oil. It's basically just a surface coat, and if you get a flake in it, then it's game over. It just starts flaking off all over the place. So I want something that's actually going to penetrate the wood and protect it from the inside out, and that's what this old school concoction will do. So I'm looking forward to trying that next year. I think what I might do, because you have to apply it hot, this concoction, so I bought a little crock pot, and I was actually going to heat it up to about 120 degrees to apply it. And I might try it. The very first thing when I get home next summer is I'm going to strip down a couple of my hatch covers, get all the Cetol off there, and I'm going to apply it there. It's a very low risk area, and just see how it works on teak, but it should work. So that's the plan. So Hard Dodger was a fail. It was a very valuable learning lesson. I learned a lot of a lot of stuff about what not to do next year. So I don't consider, yes, it was a failure. I don't consider it an absolute failure. You know, we learn by making mistakes and learning from our mistakes. Now, I wish I would have started this a little earlier in the summer. I did lollygag for about 2 weeks in the middle, in the middle of the summer. I did not much for a couple of weeks, and I wish I would have spent that time a little better. But even if I had those extra 2 weeks, it wouldn't have been enough time to recreate all the panels and make a second attempt. So it worked out this way, and I'm okay with it, and hopefully next year it'll turn out a lot better. So that's it for this week. And that's all we have time for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't make these videos. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotton, Peter Allen, and Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. Your support really means the world to me. I do have one legacy patron member, and her name is Joan Linbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below, and that'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there are hundreds, literally hundreds of extra videos and photos of our travels, and I try and keep everything there up to date and post at least once or twice a week, so it gives you a little peek behind the curtain. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That'll help us out more than you'll ever know, and that actually doesn't cost you anything, so hit that like button. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.